President and Editor-in-Chief of Geopolitics. Really delighted to be back with everybody here. We have been hosting events, conversations with leaders during this pandemic, try to shed some light on where we are and where we're headed. It's been really an interesting experience, and so many of you from around the world have joined in. Thank you for being a part of this series. And it continues today with someone who I'm really eager to hear from. Dr. K.Y. Amoako is the founder and president of the African Center for Economic Transformation. He's a name many of you know, those of you especially who focus on African development in and around the development community as a leader for many, many decades now. Spent quite a lot of time at the World Bank. He's probably, maybe best known in his career for having been executive secretary of the Economic Commission for Africa, and of course, standing up and leading what is a major African think tank at the African Center for Economic Transformation. So he's someone who spends a lot of time speaking with leaders in our field, leaders at the multilateral level and at the national government level. And people seek him out for his views and his opinions. In fact, he's put those together into a book, which just came out just the beginning of this pandemic, called Know the Beginning Well, an inside journey through 5 decades of African development. And we're really excited to get the chance to hear from KY today, just get a chance to have a discussion with him about that book and about his broader views on African development and where we're headed. KY, thanks for taking some time.
Thanks very much, Raj. Look forward to talking with you. It's a pleasure.
Thanks. Well, maybe we could just start with the title of your book, Know the Beginning Well. What does it mean?
Well, I always study African proverbs. And on most occasions, when I'm faced with a challenge or something, I go through the proverbs and pick up something that motivates me and give me a sense of reality. And in writing this book, like you said, I spent my career, I came to the US in 1969, went to the University of California, Berkeley for my graduate work, joined the World Bank.
Did a PhD in economics there at Berkeley.
For joined the World Bank for 20 years or so, and then went to the Economic Commission for Africa. So I was fortunate to have seen the evolution of African independent development for many years. And I'm being Ghanaian and having lived in Ghana and brought up in Ghana at the time of independence, the whole vision of African development, One Africa, these were things that motivated me. So I thought I'd been fortunate to have moved with the times and I had something to say. And then in writing the book, I didn't have a title in mind. I knew I had something to say. So I took my book of African proverbs just to find something. And lo and behold, there was a proverb which says, if you know the beginning well, the end shall not trouble you. So I said, wow, right on. So let me tell a story of African development, what we've gone through, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and the hopes for the future, so that we can learn from the lessons of the past, what we've been through, in order to help us shape the course of the future. So
Can we talk a little about that future? Because, not long ago, there was this idea of Africa rising.
Yeah.
I think that was a magazine cover, got a lot of attention. Yeah. There were a number of African countries that had, significant economic growth, some of the highest growth rates in the world. And then we saw a downturn.
Yeah.
And a number of challenges. And of course, a lot of that economic growth came from natural resources, oil and minerals, commodities. There's still tremendous conflict. There's climate change, desertification, extremism. Of course, Africa is a large continent, a lot of countries here, so we can't generalize, but there's a lot of challenges, let's say. And I wonder, when you think about that future and you think of that Africa rising frame, is that the right frame, or what is the frame you would place on the continent today?
That's a very, very good point. In fact, these are things that keep me awake at night, to be honest. So you come to the core of it. I was at the ECA at the time of Africa Rising started. Like I said, I was at the bank. I saw the downturn, the 70s, the challenges with poverty reduction, the structural adjustment lending, all that. So when I went to the EC in 1995, those periods, that's when the growth started and the sense of optimism. And you also have some African leaders really taking initiatives to propel the African continent forward. So it was a positive environment. And in those days, the growth rate also started picking up. So you started having, from Hopeless Africa to Africa Rising, look at the Economist magazine, that's where it started from. So there was a sense of optimism. Now, and I was part of that, working with leaders like Mbeki, Obasanjo, Melis, and all that. And I remember going to number 10 Downing Street at the invitation of Tony Blair to make a speech about Africa, the future of Africa. So there was a sense of optimism. But even then, Raj, I had one major concern, that the growth and all that we're seeing was too much commodity driven. Obviously, policies has improved. That was good news. Governance was improving. So there were some elements that propelled this growth. But fundamentally, I was concerned that can this continue? And the whole issue of structural change. And that's why I started talking about the need for economic transformation. And so in a sense, African countries transforming in a way that this growth can be self-sustaining. And if you look at the last 20 years, we've made positive gains. Growth rate has been quite positive. Per capita incomes have increased, but not by that much. And now the pandemic, which I'm sure we'll come to, is threatening all that. And when you begin to go deep down, then you begin to see the sort of the fragility. We're too dependent on a few, we are not diversified enough in our production structures and economies. We are not very competitive in export markets. Productivity by and large across all sectors are quite low in Africa, and technology is also not upgraded. And these are the factors that would drive sustained growth. And that's the story from China, that's the story from Malaysia, all these countries. So in a sense, if you look at the future, like I said, the good news is that we've been through this, policies have improved, but until fundamentally we address the issues of these drivers of transformation, and that's why the African Center for Economic Transformation was all about to promote the paradigm of transformation and what governments need to do to make sure that this growth is sustained over time.
Right, and this is really the challenge, because when you think about the theme of Africa Rising, it connects a lot to the issues of foreign assistance, of aid, of the World Bank, where you used to work, and what their role should be. And there was a sense that, well, you hear the statistics all the time about how foreign direct investment is outpacing foreign aid, but as you peel the layers back and you look down, you realize actually in many of the countries we're talking about, foreign aid remains a major source of budget support for countries. And so what do you think about the role of the international institutions of foreign aid at a moment when, due to the pandemic in part, but countries like the UK are potentially looking to cut their foreign assistance? You've got some beeping going on over there.
I know what's going on here. Yeah, but that's a very important. In fact, at the height in the 90s and early 2000s, with the African peer review mechanism, with Nepal, with the G8, right now the international aid is very, very different from what we have in those days. You remember the Montreal Consensus. You remember the whole case of doubling aid to Africa, the whole idea of the 0.75% of GNI going to aid. There was a sense of optimism that aid could be a factor. Now it's changed totally for a variety of reasons. And therefore the aid is it's still important, but one thing we have learned now is clear, that we cannot transform based on aid. So we need to do a lot more on our own. Whilst aid is, and if you talk about DFID and the UK, and even all those countries are they also, their priorities are changing.
Mm-hmm.
And now focus more is on private sector financing. And how can you crowd in more private sector financing? So what do we need to do? A, for more domestic resource mobilization, and also to bring in more private finance. Aid will play a role, clearly, more in some countries more than in others, as well in the fragile countries. But for middle-income countries and countries of that nature, low middle, aid is going to not be a major factor. It's still an important factor, but it's more the domestic resource mobilizations, is the more the private sector. That's where the answer will have to be come from.
People in the global development community often point to South Korea as a great example of where aid can work, and there's quite a bit of debate, of course, about that. When you look at the countries in Africa that today are doing well, and there are several that are doing well, maybe at least pre-pandemic, do you think the story there shows that aid did support an economic transformation? Maybe you can mention some of those countries as well, just so we can get specific.
Well, I think if you look at a country like Rwanda, you have to have the right policies in place to attract the aid, and you have to use the aid more effectively. So I think the countries like Rwanda have been very crafty in the way they've set up their strategy, especially for education, for the agricultural sector. So in some sectors, aid can really make a difference. And countries that have had a clear-cut strategy of knowing what to do the aid for and using the aid very effectively. So I'll clearly say that Rwanda is one. Ethiopia is also, especially for the agricultural sector transformation strategy, education. So I also give high marks to how Rwanda has, Ethiopia has also used aid. And my own country, Ghana, I wouldn't say is the best example, frankly, but also I think it's also made good use of some aid, yeah. But like I said, the key is domestic resource mobilization. The key is the private sector, and we bring in aid when that helps.
And so it's really about the policy framework, setting up the policies, and obviously having the leadership in the country to set up the right policy framework that then attracts and uses aid effectively, private investment effectively, domestic resources effectively.
Yeah, I always say the key factors are policies matter a lot. So having the right policies, the smart policies, and you talk about South Korea. These are some of the lessons. Policies matter, smart policies. You need the institutions, strong and capable institutions, also to implement. You need to have the capacity also to implement policies. These are the lessons we've learned. And about leadership, transformative leadership. So those are some of the lessons we've learned from Korea and some of those places. And if those factors come together, then both on the aid side, on the domestic resource mobilization side, and also the role of the private sector. And we also have to realize that transformation is a partnership between the government and the private sector. So how those work in tandem, and how you develop your strategy, development strategy that allows complementary roles to play effectively and the right leadership in place. And on one thing that, Raj, I always say, transformation is a long-term process. It doesn't happen overnight. So to have a clear vision of where you want to go, and the challenge we face in many African countries and the area of multi-party democracy is how do you set a vision that you can carry through over time, where successive governments may make changes in programs and all that, but that vision and that long-term strategy is what can make a difference. Because it takes about 15, 20 years to see the kind of fundamental changes we are. So these are the factors that are at play, and these are the lessons from the rest of the world. Yeah.
I think there's a few things out of that I want to probe with you. One is what you just described about the need to have a long-term government vision. Two of the examples you gave, Rwanda and Ethiopia, are countries that do that, but they also have their critics, because people might say, well, these are quasi-authoritarian governments, they're too strong, there isn't a real open democracy. How do you think about that issue? Do you think we have the wrong view in the West maybe about the importance of truly open democracy, or do you think that there's a trade-off here, or what?
You mentioned my book, Know the Beginning Well. So let me do a little PR for myself.
Please.
If you look at the last chapter of the book, it addresses precisely that question. Because I read that fundamentally it has to come to that. After we've gone through all this about the leadership issues, about the long-term vision. So the question becomes, if you look at Africa today, what's happening there? We started with independent, a lot of, like I said, governance has improved. Countries have moved more to multi-party democracy in some senses, transparency, role of civil society. That was the good news. And countries like Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, Kenya have multi-party systems. And you have the other countries like Ethiopia and Rwanda that have governments in power for a long time. And people say strongman rule. And you see this tension. And people are asking, which is the model? And a lot of my contemporaries in Africa today say, oh, the Ethiopia, the Rwanda model works because it pays, it yields results. You may have some corruption like in other countries, but it's not the same. So you have this debate going on. And if you take my own country, Ghana, it's stable. The government comes for 2 years or 2 terms, another government comes, and the back and forth. So you don't see this sustained. So the question that I had to address, what was my own answer to that, which I tried to address in the book, is that it is not a one-size-fits-all. Every country has its beginnings, its history, and where it is today. And in the book, I make it very clear that if I take my own country, given all its faults and challenges, there are some really fundamentally good things that's happened. And that if that model of a Ghanaian democracy can prevail and can have a long-term vision of this nature, and the leadership and the political system can come around to what works and commit, then you have a model that I'll be comfortable saying this is the way to go.
At least in the past, you had most of the donor nations with a very Western idea of what the model should be, and they were out promoting that, pushing that. Now there's something of a scramble for Africa again with China.
Sure.
And they have obviously a very different vision, a very different model. How do you see that playing out today in the continent? Because it's not as though these are countries that are in a vacuum making these decisions. Yeah. They now have a lot of pressure and a lot of incentives coming from an increasingly kind of Cold War dynamic happening in the world between the United States and China.
Yeah. And also there's another dimension to that, Raj, you agree, that even in the West, or the architect of democracy and all that, when you see what's happening.
That's right.
Western part of the world.
That's right. Look at the US, look at many countries in Europe, sure.
So it's very confusing. So the emperor has no clothes. So what does it mean for Africa? So African elites or even the youth are questioning. And then you have the dynamics of China. Like you say, you have India. And when you look at geopolitics now in Africa, the relationship, there's the European Union having its own strategies and policies for Africa. So in a sense, it's quite complicated. But the key, and the other thing that, Raja, is always, and I think we come to that, is the issue of a one Africa, integration, regional integration. It's a issue of Africa having a common vision of what it wants and our leaders to move. So when you think about China deals with 54 African countries. So there's no single African policy. Our African policy doesn't have a single China policy. So we need to come to a point where the collective might of the African continent and the leadership can also, when it comes to negotiations, geopolitics, speak with one voice. If we do that, I think that will help a lot. So that's the way I see it. Leadership, regional integration, and a collective sense of purpose and driving the agenda. And so when it even comes to negotiations on some of these issues, we can be more impactful. Yeah.
And I think trade is that key kind of tip of the spear of this issue, right? And there's been a longstanding desire to see cross-border trade within Africa improve, tariffs come down, the customs be easier, as well as the relationship with other countries like China.
Yeah. Trade, in fact, we're coming up, my organization, the Africa Center for Economic Transformation, we started pushing this transformation agenda. We put it on the map, as you know, and many people have rolled around. I'm proud to say. So every 3 years, we come up with a major report on African economic transformation. The first report, 2014, when we actually put the paradigm of what does transformation mean, some of the issues I talked about first. And then later, 3 years ago, we did another report on agriculture. The fundamental agriculture will have to propel Africa's transformation because of the. Okay. This year, we're coming up with another one about the future of Africa. And we are looking at 4 issues: climate, innovations, demographics, and then coming with demographics and I forget. Anyway, the 4th one will come to me. Regional integration. Sorry, integration. And so we're looking in depth on the integration question, and some of the things we are going to say is very different. For too long, we focus on tariffs, trade liberalization, and facilitation. That's important. But if you look at integration, there's a lot more to it than that. And on the tariff side, implementation has been awful. The political will has not been there. We sign protocols, the institutions to implement them don't come. The finance is not there, even for the institutions who rely on donor financing. So there's a lot more that we need to do on the integration side. We are pushing this idea of regional public goods in terms of how you use your waterways, your power pools, cross-border infrastructure. So there's a whole lot more to the integration agenda that we need to do. And if we can bring all these things together, then I think we can make progress. So we should not just focus on tariffs reduction alone as a key to integration. It's more broader than that, more complex than that. But if we can get it right, the payoffs will be so huge.
You've mentioned technology and innovation a couple of times. And one thing I wonder, and I've had this discussion with other leading economists like yourself, is the model of development that we've long looked to, is it just going to be different for sub-Saharan Africa? So typically we think about countries that have relatively cheap labor forces moving into low-skilled manufacturing. And you can see that in Southeast Asia and China. But now with 3D printing, with automation, especially with the pandemic, a desire to onshore, to re-onshore manufacturing to countries like the US, is it going to be manufacturing, or is there going to be some different method for countries in Africa to really rise up? How do you see it?
Yeah, we see it differently at the Economic Commission for Africa. And that's why when we talk about transformation, we were not talking about structural transformation in that typical sense. Because you're right, the old model was that you move from agriculture to more value addition and all that in manufacturing, and over time you move into services, right? That's a model. No, it's not happening that way in Africa at all. All right, now agriculture only contributes to 15% of GDP. Services contribute 52% of GDP. And manufacturing is something 10% there, so different. So we don't look at it that way. And you're right, with technology and 3D printing, artificial intelligence, also another equation altogether. So the model for Africa is going to be different. Now, we talk about transformation, and the good news for Africa, we have a lot of resources, most countries, natural resources, water resources, tourism. So transformation, if you take any sector, you need to transform that sector, okay, by making it more productive, then productivity increases by making it more technological, upgrading skills and all that. So a country can have tourism, a country can have agriculture, whatever. So it's not that linear because we pass that. So then the question becomes on the technology side, what can technology do? Because we're talking about technology innovation and the sense now of digital innovation in particular. So for example, we need to crowd in more venture capital for entrepreneurs. If you look at what's happening in the continent now, I think the venture capital in Africa is about $1.5 billion a year in 2008. In India, it's about 17 billion or so. In China, it's 70 billion. So how do you crowd in more venture capital? We also need to support ecosystems in the innovation sector. So these are some of the things that we need to do. So technology, and then you talk about the fourth industrial revolution and all that, and the skills, the training. And that's where the labor force comes in. And the fact that the youth population, the youth bulge and all that, and the potential. So if you can also then crowd that in on the skill side, then the sectoral composition is important, but it's not that linear. Mm-hmm. So that's my answer to your question.
So you published your book in March.
Yeah.
I'm presuming you finally finished putting pen to paper before this pandemic really hit. How do you see the impact of the pandemic on these transformations that you're hoping to see African countries achieve? Will it accelerate the potential? Will it, even with all the downsides, I mean, you talked about tourism, that's obviously dropped. Natural resource commodity prices have dropped. There's all kinds of challenges, but is there any chance that this pandemic will force a transformation in some of the countries, at least, that you're focused on?
That's two things. That's a question we'll be trying to answer in the report that's coming out by December. Precisely that. Because I said the future of Africa, these are the factors of climate, innovation, regional integration, and demographics that's going to drive it. The question, therefore, is how does the pandemic impact another? Right now, with the pandemic, as you know very well, the focus has been on the short-term measures to stabilize the economies, to get more debt relief, all that. Countries are doing what they can for the health systems because of the revenue situation and all that. So the immediate short-term needs are important. But we also believe the pandemic also, the phrase we tend to use, don't let the crisis go to waste. There are certain things that you should have been doing anyway. That's even more urgent where the pandemic even causes the need.
Can you give an example? Give us an example of one of them.
Well, take the whole issue of resource mobilization management. We're talking a bit about aid, and I said domestic resource mobilization is important. Right now, GDP ratio in most African countries are around 12%. Okay, the highest in countries could be about 20%. In the West, it's 30 to 40%. Okay? Now, if you look, the tax loopholes are so huge in many of our countries, tax exemptions and all. So you need to close some of these loopholes. Okay, so as to try to give your tax GDP ratio up. We need to also, what governance, effectiveness, and transparency, the way we use our resources, overlapping mandates, poor public sector spending. So those are some of the issues that we also need to deal with. And dealing with some of them now and later, after you close tax loopholes and all that, also increase the tax base over time. So we need to move from 10, 12% of tax GDP to 20, 30%. So these are some of the things we have to do. And what I'm saying that with the pandemic, we need to start doing some things, stop these things, certain things that we're doing. Okay, that's one in that area. Another area clearly is the whole question of public expenditure management. So those are some of the things that we need to do now that also there's the scene for. And then in the longer term also, business and investment environment. How do you put the ease of doing business? All those issues also become very important because in the long run, the private sector has to drive. And then we talked about innovations already, some of the things you need to do. So the question we're asking ourselves is that how can some of these factors affect the long-term transformation agenda? And the pandemic, to the extent that it's also showing that certain things have to be done differently, sort of supply chains, they need to do things more on a regional basis. And the importance of regional integration becomes more important in that case, in terms of supply chains and all that. So the pandemic also shows that there are certain things we need to do differently. And if we can do that and stick them, that will also help with the transformation agenda.
You know, you're right. This is kind of a forcing mechanism potentially for a reform agenda for governments. But at the same time, even if you can improve tax to GDP ratios now, there's a good chance you're going to see significant recession in a lot of countries, reduced government revenues. Yeah. And you know, your own country, in Ghana, the president has called for this idea of beyond aid, growth beyond aid. Yeah. But it seems to me that we're in a moment when aid is going to be actually even more important, in the short run at least.
Yeah.
What is your advice to the big donor countries, the organizations like the World Bank? Are they doing enough at this point, or is there something different they should be doing given the outsized role they're likely to play in a significant economic downturn?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that point, because clearly I've been focused on what Africa needs to do for itself on the transforming long-term agenda. But in the short-term, crisis is huge. And that's why the international community's role has been very important and even more important. So far, the sense that if you look at the G20 discussions, the whole issue has been on the debt standstill issue, which is very important. Even then, it's not sufficient. They've all gone through 2020. We think they should go more to 2021.
Mm-hmm. And it's only through the end of 2020, and then they still have to make the payments. Yeah. Right. There's nothing forgiven. It's really just a moratorium.
Yeah. It's not debt cancellation. It's not debt. So the issue of debt cancellation, and so far it's only the bilaterals, right? Debt that we are affected. So multilateral debt and the private sector. So there's a lot more that the international community can do in that sense, in the short run. And I'm hoping that over the next couple of months, with the G20, IMF, World Bank meetings coming, hopefully we can see more of a push in this direction in terms of, especially on the debt side. And I think China is beginning also to come to the table. And I think the China debt is also very important. So it's not just the World Bank and the others, but the whole international community. On the IMF side, the issue of maybe having more special drawn rights so that countries can go easily, more cheaply. So all these factors have to come to play. And then obviously there's the other issue of some of the initiatives on education, on the health sector. So there's a lot more that the international community can do. But bilateral aid, I'm so far not seeing much of a push for more. And the developments in the UK with DFID in particular, that's a bit disturbing, because the UK has been a real push on some of the 0.75 and the aid issues. So we have to see whether the European Union can really come to the table now and also push. So there's a lot more that we need to be done on the international scene. Yeah. At the same time,
Yeah, I've been asking this question to leaders like yourself throughout this series of conversation, and with only a few exceptions, it's been surprising that there haven't been that many big calls for significant bilateral aid or big ideas. And you're right, we don't hear much from the bilateral donors other than the politics of cutting aid. You're not hearing much about this as a moment when we should be doing more on public health, for example.
Yeah, more on public health. There are a couple of initiatives that one I can talk about, but the other one I can't, that you'll be hearing about soon, that I'm involved with some other folks, international leaders to really push, but I'm not allowed to talk about that yet. So maybe in a couple of months, you hear more precisely on this issue, to re-mobilize international support around 3 areas. One will be the health systems. How do we build back better so that the health systems are more robust? That's one of the lessons, okay? The other one is what we've been talking so far, the economic transformation agenda, long term, and how does bilateral and multilateral aid support. So for example, a lot of discussions we've been having with the European Union, with the Germans and the Compact with Africa, how can we revitalize that and bring others to the table? That's another area. And the third area is also the whole question of fragility. How do you deal with some of these fragile states, conflicts, and all that? So in all 3 areas, but I was very active in the aid movement, in the development finance movement, in the push for Commission for Africa with Tony Blair in those days, in the Montreal Consensus, in the doubling of aid for Africa, in the G20, G8. And I went at one G8 meeting of heads of state, Bill Bush was there and all that, talking about Africa. That's not the situation anymore. And that's the reality. And that's why Kufuor talks about Ghana beyond aid. So I think aid is important, but the sense is that we need to prepare to move beyond that for a variety of reasons. And sometimes aid has worked, sometimes it hasn't worked, with all the stories about conditionality and all that. So there's fatigue, in some sense, on both sides. Mm-hmm. That's a reality. So the question, how do we go beyond that? And but when you talk about the pandemic, though, there is short-term crisis, and unless we solve it, the impact not only on Africa, but on the rest of the world is going to be terrible. So there's a sense that we need to come together. And so far, we've not seen enough. You see the amount of money that is being printed in the US, in the UK, and all and the EU to stabilize the economies. We can do that.
There isn't the fiscal space in most African countries to do anything close to that.
Close to that. So there's still an issue that at this time, the international community must come together and really see that all the progress Africa has made. And, you talk about poverty reduction. Some of the statistics we've seen, as you know, this year GDP in Africa will fall by 3.2%. The per capita incomes this year will be back to the level of 15 years ago or so. More people are going to be thrown into poverty. It's a fact. So as much as I talk about what Africa needs to do for itself, for ourselves, the reality in the short term is that there's a lot more that the international community needs to do. But we don't see the players coming together. You don't see yeah, that's the issue. Who's leading?
Who's leading? You're right. That is the issue. It's a question we hear lots of people asking, even to us all the time here at DevX. Yeah. The time has gone quickly. It's been a fascinating discussion. Yeah. Dr. K.Y. Amoako, I got to thank you for taking the time to share all these thoughts with us and to share your book and your thoughts in that book with the world. So, I recommend it to everyone. Know the beginning well. And best wishes to you and all your colleagues at the African Center for Economic Transformation. Thank you for for being a part of this. And for those who've joined from all over the world, thank you for being a part of this continuing series of interviews. And I look forward to your engagement as we go forward. Be well.
Okay, thanks. Bye-bye, Raj.
Thank you, KY.
Yeah.